Two street criminals on a Chicago city bus believed they could intimidate a frightened medical worker without consequences. They laughed, shouted, and harassed her, until they made one irreversible mistake. They kicked the calm German shepherd sitting quietly beside her. What they didn't realize was that the dog belonged to Mason Lewis, a Navy SEAL on forced leave. In less than 10 seconds, both attackers were neutralized. What Mason didn't know was that this single moment would pull him into a deadly conflict far larger than anything he imagined. A sharp wind rolled in from Lake Michigan, cutting through the city streets like a blade. Chicago wore its winter face, gray, heavy, and unwelcoming. Mason stood at a worn bus stop, his tall frame unmoving despite the cold. At 32, he carried the quiet strength of a man shaped by war zones. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes alert, always scanning. Sitting perfectly still beside him was Echo, a large sable-coated German shepherd. Echo wasn't just a dog, he was a retired military working K9, disciplined, focused, and bonded deeply to his handler. Mason's truck had broken down miles away, forcing them onto public transport. When the bus finally arrived, the driver hesitated at the sight of the dog. Mason calmly showed his military ID. "Service animal," he said flatly. The driver waved him on without argument. They took seats near the back. Across the aisle sat a young woman in scrubs, exhaustion written across her face. Elena Rossetti, a medical student, leaned against the window, barely awake. The bus jolted to the next stop and two loud young men climbed aboard. Their energy filled the space immediately, crude jokes, shouting, arrogance. They noticed Elena instantly. One leaned over her seat, mocking her, invading her space. She asked them to stop. They didn't. No one else on the bus moved. Fear kept every passenger silent. Mason felt the tension lock into his chest. "She said she's not interested," he said calmly. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The men turned toward him, laughing. One glanced at Echo with disgust and muttered something hateful. Then came the threat. Then the raised boot. Everything happened at once. Mason moved. He caught the kick midair, struck with precision, and dropped the larger man hard. The second thug pulled a knife, but Mason slammed him into a seat and pinned him effortlessly. Within moments, both attackers were panicking, apologizing, and scrambling off the bus. Mason sat back down as if nothing had happened. Echo returned to a perfect sit. The bus rolled forward again, but Mason's instincts told him something had shifted. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The bus ride into downtown Chicago felt longer than it should have. The heat inside did little to ease the cold settling deep into Mason Lewis's bones. The adrenaline from the confrontation slowly faded, replaced by a sharp, uneasy awareness, the same instinct that had kept him alive on countless missions overseas. Something wasn't right. When Mason and Echo stepped off the bus near his brother's apartment complex, night had already swallowed the city. Streetlights cast a dull orange glow across cracked sidewalks and aging buildings. The wind howled between concrete towers, carrying the smell of exhaust and wet pavement. Mason adjusted the strap of his backpack and tightened Echo's leash, heading toward a mid-range apartment building known as the Spire. His brother Ethan lived here. Ethan was an investigative journalist, brilliant, stubborn, and reckless in Mason's eyes. He chased truth like a man who didn't understand fear, and that scared Mason more than any battlefield ever had. Inside the lobby, Mason immediately noticed something off. The security desk was empty. No guard. No movement. Mail sat piled and untouched. The elevator was out of order, a cheap warning sign taped across the doors. Mason took the stairs, each step echoing too loudly in the unnatural silence. On the fourth floor, Echo stopped. His ears lifted. The fur along his spine rose. A deep growl vibrated from his chest. Mason pulled out a small tactical flashlight. Apartment 4B. The door frame was splintered. The lock shattered inward. Mason pushed the door open slowly. The apartment was destroyed. Furniture overturned, cushions slashed, papers scattered everywhere. It looked like a rushed search, violent and desperate. Mason's eyes moved quickly, cataloging details, what was taken, what was ignored. Then he saw the body. Ethan lay near the kitchen island, motionless. Mason rushed forward, already knowing the truth before his fingers touched cold skin. There was a single gunshot wound to the chest. Clean. Precise. Fatal. This wasn't a robbery. It was an execution. Grief hit him like a wave, but Mason forced it down. Survival first. Emotion later. Heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Police entered, 2 uniforms and a detective in a cheap suit. Detective Miller. Miller barely glanced at the scene before declaring it a junkie robbery gone wrong. Mason challenged him calmly, pointing out inconsistencies. Miller didn't care. Worse, he didn't want to. Ethan's case was being buried. Forced outside, Mason stood under a flickering streetlight, rage burning behind his eyes. That's when he remembered the package Ethan had mailed him weeks earlier, a tactical collar for Echo and a strange note, for heavy loads. Keep it close. Mason examined the collar and felt something hidden inside. A micro SD card. Ethan hadn't sent a gift. He'd sent evidence. And whoever killed Ethan would do anything to get it back. Mason didn't go home. Home wasn't safe, not anymore. With the micro SD card hidden securely, he moved through the city with purpose, choosing anonymity over comfort. He ended up at a rundown 24-hour internet cafe called the Neon Spider, a forgotten relic glowing faintly against the frozen streets. He paid cash, selected a private booth, and immediately got to work. The card was encrypted, but Ethan had always been predictable in small ways. Mason tried his childhood nickname as the password. It opened instantly. What appeared on the screen wasn't just a news story, it was a full-scale dossier. Emails, shipping manifests, surveillance photos. The operation was called Project Ares. At the center of it all was Black Ridge, a private military contractor officially hired for disaster relief and urban security. Unofficially, they were smuggling military-grade weapons, missiles, drones, automatic rifles, straight into Chicago, selling them to criminal networks. Ethan hadn't been murdered for asking questions. He'd been killed for being right. Mason was still processing the scope of the conspiracy when something in the reflection of the monitor caught his eye. Outside the cafe, a black SUV rolled to a silent stop. 3 men stepped out, moving with trained coordination. Not cops. Not street thugs. Hunters. Gunfire shattered the cafe windows. Chaos erupted. Mason yanked the SD card free, hurled a fire extinguisher through the emergency exit, and sprinted into the alley with Echo at his side. Bullets tore through drywall behind them as they vanished into the freezing night. 20 minutes later, bleeding from a grazing shot to the shoulder, Mason leaned against a dumpster, breathing hard. He couldn't go to a hospital, police were compromised. That's when he remembered the woman from the bus. Elena Rossetti. St. Jude's Medical Center was only a few blocks away. Sneaking in through a delivery entrance, Mason found her in the locker room. She panicked at first, then saw the blood. Training took over. She stitched him up quickly, silently. When Mason mentioned his brother's name, Elena froze. She had seen Ethan days earlier, arguing with a bald man bearing a cobra tattoo. That symbol confirmed everything. Before they could speak further, the hospital went into lockdown. The mercenaries had tracked him. Mason realized Elena was now a target too. They fled through service corridors, dodging armed men disguised as SWAT. Echo disabled one attacker while Mason fought the other. They escaped through a trash chute, stole a delivery van, and disappeared into traffic under a hail of gunfire. By the time they reached an abandoned industrial warehouse on the city's edge, both understood the truth. There was no turning back. Elena's quiet life was over. And Mason's war had just begun. The abandoned warehouse near the lake was silent except for the wind pushing through broken windows and the distant hum of the city. Mason chose the location carefully. Thick concrete walls. No cameras. No foot traffic. A place he knew from years ago, long before Chicago became hostile ground. He checked the perimeter while Elena sat on a crate, hands clasped tightly, trying to steady her breathing. Echo stayed close to her, alert but calm. Mason finally powered up an old laptop he had stored in a sealed case. He inserted the SD card. What appeared confirmed his worst fears. Project Ares wasn't just weapon smuggling, it was a coordinated domestic operation. Dates, flight paths, warehouse locations, offshore accounts. Black Ridge wasn't working alone. City officials, police commanders, and federal contractors were listed as silent partners. Ethan had been mapping the entire network. "This is why they killed him," Elena whispered. Mason nodded. "And why they won't stop." As if on cue, Echo's ears snapped upright. A low growl rolled from his chest. Mason shut the laptop instantly, killed the light, and motioned Elena behind cover. Tires crunched outside. Multiple vehicles. They had been found. Flashlights sliced through the darkness. Men moved with trained precision. Mercenaries, not cops. Mason counted at least 6. He whispered instructions to Elena, handed her a pistol, and told her exactly where to aim if things went wrong. She didn't argue. The first attacker never saw Echo coming. The German Shepherd launched from the shadows, slamming the man to the ground in a blur of fur and force. Mason moved at the same moment, striking hard and fast. This wasn't chaos, it was controlled violence. Years of training took over. One enemy fell. Then another. Gunfire echoed through the warehouse. Elena fired once, hands shaking, but the shot counted. Mason disarmed the last man and knocked him unconscious. The silence afterward was heavy, broken only by Echo's breathing. But Mason knew this was only a scouting team. The real threat was coming. Using a secure connection Ethan had prepared, Mason uploaded every file, every name, every transaction, to multiple international servers and news outlets. Once the data went live, it couldn't be buried. By morning, Chicago exploded. Federal raids. Arrest. Black Ridge offices sealed. Project Ares exposed. The city woke up to headlines it couldn't ignore. Ethan's work had finally reached daylight. Weeks later, Mason stood at his brother's grave. The case was closed publicly, but Mason knew the truth. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Elena stood beside him, stronger now, changed forever. Echo sat at Mason's feet, watchful as always. Mason didn't return to the military. He stayed in Chicago and opened a rehabilitation and training center for working dogs, giving broken warriors, human and canine, a second purpose. He still watched his surroundings. He always would. But the war was over. And for the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel dangerous.